First things first. Good morning, everyone. Oh, wow, from Zurich. Last minute registrations. Okay. Okay, so I have to start just out of respect for the people who logged in on time. Thank you very much for being with us in When Ninjas Turn Unicorns. This is a special webinar to discuss the case study of Ninja's latest unicorn status. Imagine that. In 2022, they just started. And then 3 years later, you have a unicorn 1.5 billion valuation. This is almost one of the very few fastest growing startups in our region. So I thought to myself, you know what? It's worth studying. So I actually did all sorts of study, deep research, AI, read almost every single blog posts, article, even the founders themselves, their own posts on LinkedIn and otherwise, just to see the thinking behind how they did it and how can we replicate that? Is there anything that we can do to learn and then hopefully be able to do it? Because if they could do it, why couldn't we do it? So I went into this rabbit hole a few weeks since early second week, was it? Second or first week of July until today, and I've been reading about them, and it's fascinating. The good news is it can be replicated, 100%, 100%. Now, the thing is, if you follow it word for word, no one knows the future, obviously, and anyone who predicts the future is some sort of a liar if they're 100% confident. So no one can predict the future with any degree of confidence, but there's always a process, there's always a system, there's always a structure that if we follow, if you put a seed and you water it and you give it all the nurturing that it needs, eventually, at its own organic pace, it will grow to be a tree and have fruits. And that's what we're trying to do in this webinar. So let me just run you over a quick introduction of what this hour will look like. So first, we will talk about the financial stuff. So everything that had to do with their own finances and how they manage their operations, financial operations. Then we'll talk about marketing, their go-to-market, how did they assess the market, how did they approach the market, how did they influence the market, and then we will talk about their product plan. How did they match the product to the market? And just a quick note on marketing. Many of the founders that I work with underestimate the power of marketing, especially early on when it comes to a startup, because it's all about showing bigger size than who you are. Then we will talk about operations plan. Now, this is not as important, but if you want to achieve a unicorn in 3 years, you will see why it's very important to do it very early on, to think about it very early on. And then we'll talk about the resource planning. How did they approach talent? How did they approach advisory? Then we'll talk about their legal structure. Then we'll talk about their burn rate. How did they manage their finances? How did they manage their expenses? Then, obviously, their exit, initial exit, but also their IPO, the plan for IPO. And you will notice that they had the IPO in their mind since 2022. Then we will analyze the external influences. So what are the things that happened to them outside of their control that they leveraged on? And then internal influences, what are the internal strengths and leverages that they possessed and had control over? Finally, we'll go into an action plan. What can we copy from them today, word for word? And then we'll go into some conclusions and Q&A. So, with that being said, let me just make some. Okay, I'm just getting some messages. So let me just respond to some of my friends. Okay, I'm having my phone with me here, just in case some of my close friends. But also, I have my own browser open, and I know that audio is working and video is working. So I don't need to ask you, can you hear me or can you see me? I know I can see myself. I know the amount of delay, so that's fine. Anyway, so let's start. The financial model. Okay, so before the financial model, which is extremely important, and I wanted to do it in tandem with the financial model, is the problem. Whenever you think about a startup or you think about an entrepreneurial venture, the first thing that you're asked is, what problem are you trying to solve? So let's go back in 2022. So the year is 2022. We are the founders of Ninja. We sat together and we saw, okay, what is the problem that is currently active? And also, it has a high trend, meaning people are willing to pay money to solve this problem. And the one thing that happened to them, and that's timing, perfect timing, is that we just exited from COVID. Remember, 2022 is ages ago. If you remember 2022, that was 3 years ago, but it looked like it was 30 years ago. So at that time, the founders sat together and said, you know what? People now are on board or are using mobile devices to purchase everything they want. This is one. Second, they just came out of COVID. With the convenience of COVID, sitting at home, everything is delivered to them. So the first thing that happened to their mind is, what is that problem that they want to solve? And the problem is convenience. But when you talk about convenience, there are two branches that branch out of convenience. One is speed. So how long? I don't want to buy something and receive it in an hour or 2 hours. And second is reliability. So they're very, very clear about their problem statement and the way they want to approach it. So that's number one, as any startup would think about, is the problem and how real it is. And therefore they did that, and then they assessed the market. Assessing the market is the TAM, the target addressable market. And this is where financial model works. Because if your TAM is too big, then you're able to take a percentage of that TAM. But if your TAM is too small, the target addressable market, then you won't be able to obviously grow and convince investors to invest in you. So their TAM was $50 billion at that time. I'm sure now it's multiples more than that. And at that time, people longed for a solution of delivery that they could be able to satisfy that convenience problem. So that's number one. Now, to do that, they wanted to make sure that they're able to satisfy that. So to make that happen, they wanted to make sure that they have a go-to-market. And this is where the marketing element comes into play. Whenever you have a problem, you need to make sure that your marketing, when I say marketing, I don't mean advertising, I don't mean communication, I don't mean branding and color and font. I mean your actual strategic approach to go-to-market, to approach that problem. In my books, it's answering two fundamental questions. How would people know about your very existence? How would people that suffer from this problem know about your very existence? And why would they choose you from the sea of options that they have? Simple. That's it. Any marketing approach should lead into your target addressable audience, the ones that have the problem at a severe stage where they are willing to pay money to solve their problem, to alleviate the pain. How would they know about you, and why would they choose you from the sea of options that they have? So what they did is they said, okay, to make sure that we have a product that satisfies this problem, we need to make sure that we have a go-to-market messaging. And their go-to-market messaging was very clear. Your delivery reliably in less than 25 minutes. That's it. As simple as that. You see how it clicks and fits between the problem and the go-to-market? Your products, your delivery in less than 25 minutes reliably. That's it. Now, they worked backwards from there. From there, they started developing the product. And this is where it gets really interesting. Whenever they started developing the product, they wanted to make sure that they are able to not only match, but perfectly satisfy that go-to-market claim, even if it means they go with the least possible features within their product. So what they did, and that's very fascinating when I was reading their case, They started with only 3 neighborhoods in Riyadh in early 2022. And they set up 3 dark stores, warehouses, where they can keep their own products. They did not rely on a supply chain, they own the supply chain. But because initially they are not able to own the entire supply chain because of obviously resources and they're still starting, so 2 elements here played into their decision. A, obviously they're limited in the resources, they're just starting and they don't have any funding. But B, which is more importantly, they want to test that first hypothesis, which is their research, the strategy that they've put. The strategy that they've put is, we have a problem. This problem is prime. It's a trending problem. The TAM is 50 billion. People are longing for such solution. What do we do? Simply deliver to them in less than 25 minutes reliably. The product must match that. Otherwise, it will burn their cards. So they went to 3 neighborhoods initially. Those 3 neighborhoods, they set up 3 dark warehouses, dark stores, which means locations where they can put in their products. But they're still testing, and they don't have resources to put everything possible in Carrefour or Hyperpanda or otherwise. So what they chose is, they started with the non-perishable items or items that can have long shelf life. Imagine that. Their MVP is not a code, it's not a website, it's actually a strategic approach to what is it that they're offering to their clients and what they're not offering their clients. That's very key in early stage startups. I work with startups day in, day out. Actually, I have around 6 or 7 startups that we're working now to developing their own products and own services. And I always get this pushback from founders. And these founders, they always say, oh, we can get to 100 million, 200 million, 300 million, 400 million. And I say, okay, I believe you, but first test. It's a hypothesis. When you have a theory, you don't go ahead and test the theory with everything that you have. A small example. Whenever I get my wife a new detergent or a new solution to cleaning clothes, the first thing that she does is just she puts it on a side element or a side space of my whatever blazer or shirt. And I ask her why. It's like, okay, because if that's ruined, that's fine. Now we know it doesn't work on this shirt, but I can't put the entire solution on the shirt. And that's exactly the same thing. You have to test with a very small resources because you test and plan for failure. So this is what they did. Going back to Ninja, they went back and they started testing the market. So first thing is first, they chose 3 neighborhoods, they chose 3 dark stores, and they chose only few products that have long shelf lives. And then what they did, they developed 3 different products or interfaces or codes. The user code, which is the app, the rider code, which is the one that riders will use, and the warehouse CRM or ERP, which is the inventory management system. So those 3 were connected together. Now, it's worth mentioning here that almost all founders came from the Q-commerce background, quick commerce. So lesson number 2, all founders, A, they are multi-exit founders. One of them is a unicorn exit. So this is number 1. Number 2, they have already experience and subject matter expertise in the market and the product and the solution that they're developing. So that's why they were able to shrink time from 7 to 8 years into 3 years. So they developed these 3 products. They know exactly what they have to do, and they went to market. And here's the key. When they tested for results. In the first 4 months, and listen to this carefully, especially if you're a founder and you're a founder who is aspiring to test the market. They tested the market very small, very limited. Their marketing plan was not very expensive, but obviously it was extensive. So it's not expensive, but it was extensive. What I mean by that is they were very clear about their marketing, that they only market to these locations, and they used either influencer marketing or they used virality. So they went so hard on their product to be so useful that when they released the product, they released their app in the first 4 months, and get that, in the first 4 months, they had around 1.5 million downloads. Imagine that. 1.5 million downloads. And in 4 months, they were able to have a lot of active users. So their MAU, monthly active users, DAO, daily active users, and WOW, weekly active users. Now, this, let me just digress a bit to every startup here, and even investor who's advising startups. One thing I miss, and I don't hear enough, especially startups, is the concept of unit economics. Now, concept of unit economics is clearly not as fancy and not as clear. So let me explain it to you. Every startup, whether it's B2B or B2C, Ninja in this case is a B2C, they have their own unit economics. If it's B2C, usually it's the MAU, DAO, and WOW. Usually. If it's B2B, it's the CAC and the LTV and the ratio between these two. And we'll come to these in a second. And remember, we're still talking about marketing product because this is very, very important to get nailed at the beginning, the strategic implementation plan, and then going ahead and implementing it with testings, unit economics, testing the unit economics to know if you have to pivot, if your hypothesis, if your theory is accurate or not. So their unit economics was number of downloads, number of active daily users, monthly users, and weekly users. And they went over the roof, off the charts, every single thing. Imagine 4 months and 1.5 million. If that's not confirming their market and their hypothesis and their theory about the product market fit and the market pull and the market need and size, then I don't know what is. So they took this data, and I can now, let's say you, the viewer now, you are the investor and I am Ninja. It's end of 2022, early 2023. I have my slide deck. I have 4 or 5 months of data, real, validated data that shows market pull, unit economics, and how I approached the market. Meaning, how I tested, how I hypothesized, how I theorized, how I made assumptions, and then how I matched and exceeded those assumptions. And I put them together and I come to you and I tell you, Mr. Investor, here's my problem, here's my product, and here's the product market fit. I need money. What would you say? Of course, as an investor, you're longing for this type of money. You don't want someone to be passionate. Of course, you need passion. Of course, you need founders' energy. Of course, you need all sorts of character and influence from the founder itself and the storytelling element of the founder. But this is so overrated. And this is my view of this in this part of the world. Most of the people, I just had a call with one of the founders in Saudi, and their approach to market is mostly based on either relationships or storytelling. That's it. It's not based on scientific or academic numbers that can prove and give confidence. If there's one thing I would want everyone on this webinar to take away from today is please make sure that you are able to have actual, real, valid confidence and project this confidence to your investors, because otherwise everything else doesn't matter. Now, there are 2 types of confidence. Obviously, there's you being articulate, being able to be charismatic, having thoughts into words, performative, and real numbers. My theory, my analysis is that we need to have both. It has to be 50-50. 50%, you need to be able to perform, you need to be able to tell a story, but also you need to have numbers. So it's the quantitative numbers and the qualitative storytelling. So those 2. Back to Ninja. So now they're sitting in front of the investors. They said, hey, we have these unit economics. What's up? Investors at that time gave them a valuation of almost 180 to 200 million pre-money, post-money. Imagine that. And they took home around $30 million, and that was their pre-seed. That was a super pre-seed or seed. Imagine that. That's the dream of everyone. Almost a pitch deck, almost no product, almost no market, almost no revenue, almost. You just barely started just a few months ago, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, and you're asking investors for a valuation of around $200 million. Of course you'll get it, because you have clear traction and clear momentum that you have demonstrated with real numbers. And you've worked hard because you hypothesized and you tested the hypothesis and it won. You put it together, you developed your story, and you went to investors. Moving forward. Now they got the money. Now they're able to soar because they have resources and they have other things as well, networking, advisors. By the way, I've read one of the founders, and I'm not sure, I don't want to go into too much details. You can obviously go and fact check everything online. But the point that I want to make is no one almost, this is my reading, I didn't read it anyway, but I felt it this way. No one believed in them at the beginning. How do I know? They didn't have advisors from the start as much as later. And this is the key, most of their investors from round one were from Europe and the United States. They were not from the region. Go figure. It was one or two reasons. Either they were not ready or the investors that they approached were not ready. One of those two. But even with those numbers and even with this traction, they did not get investments, and that's the fact. They did not get investments from the region. Mostly it was led by European and United States investors. So now they got the resources. What do? First thing they do is develop the product further, which means make sure that their operations is in place. So when you talk about operations, you talk about standard operating procedures. You talk about workflows and handovers. You talk about HR, hiring and firing, everything that has to do with scaling up the business. Now, here's a point that not every startup understands, especially if they didn't come from a corporate world, is that operations is a mystery. Operations is something that is extremely difficult because you're dealing with two things. You're dealing with the strategy of the organization and the market, but also you're dealing with the culture of the organization and the market. So what I mean by that is, let me quickly just see. I have a message. Sorry for the interruption. Take a sip from your coffee. Let me see. Okay. Small interruption just to make sure. Okay, it's as real as it can get. So this is just as if we're sitting together. This is not recorded, just in case anyone is wondering. This is not recorded. I'm not AI. Just anyone is wondering, this is not AI. I know Axie, our AI agent, is an AI, but I'm not AI, and this is not recorded. So cheers to that. What was I talking about? I was talking about some investments, some company that went into unicorn. Ninja. Okay. So Ninja, one thing, just a tangent. I love the naming Ninja. Ninja is very home to GCC. I was born and raised in the UAE. And obviously we have the concept of Ninja is always with stealth, is with speed, is with reliability, is with precision. That's the concept of Ninja as we grew up in the 80s and the 90s. So they used that, and it's very fascinating how they used it as a national, how do I say it, cultural element that can be closer to people's so likability. It's like they know what people like, meaning they like as in they enjoy and they love, but also they're like, as in their thinking is like, their personalities are like, and they chose that as part of their branding and marketing. I missed that from the marketing bit. But anyway, this is a tangent. So we go back to operations. So when we talk about the operations, it's usually a mystery. Now, no investor will be able to give you anything beyond $10 million if you don't have a solid operations plan. And by operations, I mean standard operating procedures, workflows and handoffs, and everything that has to do with talent management, replicability. And let's talk about replicability for a second, because this is where this operations come into play at this time. Now the time is 2023. We have the funding, the budget. Now what do? Now we expand horizontally, meaning regionally, go out of Riyadh, go out of other places, and go into other locations within Saudi, but also vertically. Now we include perishable items. Now we include pharmaceutical items. Remember, the first items had almost zero friction when it comes to regulatory compliance. And that's a big issue that usually most of the startups don't think about. I want to expand internationally from day one. Yeah, okay, do that, but did you take into consideration the risks associated with compliance and regulations? Some compliance and regulation has to do with accessing the market. Some other has to do with the product itself that you're selling. So if you're selling pharmaceutical items, it's not like if you're selling phones or any other element that is not affecting people's lives. Financial, obviously, institutions, medical institutions, food and beverage are usually regulated at various degrees. So what they did is they start now they have the resources. So they now went into the regulation, the other highly regulated elements, which is pharmaceuticals. But they didn't stop there, because now they have enough resources. They even dared to venture into a different deliveries, which is food and beverage deliveries from restaurants. Now, I know for a fact that when they were discussing that specific business model, they were so afraid because they do not control the supply chain end to end. Remember the 25 minutes, sub 25 minutes, and reliably? They controlled that because they had the stores, they had the products, and they had the deliveries and the drivers. But when they go to restaurants, you don't control the restaurant. You don't control the time frame of the restaurant. So how can you manage? This is where resources and operations come into play. Now, two things operations fit into this time of their growth and scaling. A, replicability. So let's say you're in Dubai and you have operations in Jumeirah, Al Wasl, and maybe Al Qusais. You tend to have operational blueprints and templates with timeframes to know exactly if you want to copy the Jumeirah into Dubai Marina, how long will it take, how much it will cost, and what are the necessary talents that you need to complete that expansion. Pay attention to this. This has to be written. You cannot do it just like that. If you want to do it just like that, it's fine, but don't come near investors. Because investors need confidence, remember? So you have to test. It's like you have trial runs. And then you see the trial run and you know, okay, it took this much time, this much effort, this much obstacles, and then you add a little sum, buffers of 20% or so. This is your operations plan. So once you have your operations plan, it's easy for you to understand your resource planning because you know exactly what type of functions needed, and that's very important. Roles and responsibilities, job descriptions, and how they integrate into your entire system that you are building. Remember, you're building systems here. So now your new unit economics are different because now you're scaled up. Remember, your earlier unit economics are downloads, probably revenue, probably daily active users and monthly active users in case of B2C. In case of B2B, it's your customer acquisition cost, CAC, LTV, and others. How easy it is to acquire clients and how sticky are they? How sticky do they come back and stay with you as B2B? So those two are your unit economics early on. Now remember, if you're at the scale-up stage, those are irrelevant because they go without saying. You're already there. So your unit economics now is different. Your unit economics is KPIs, measures to know you've achieved the KPIs, accountability systems, and most importantly, talent acquisition strategies. This is the thing that Ninja was so good at. If you go now to Rocket Reach or Lucia or even LinkedIn and look at the team that worked at Ninja, so fascinating. Almost all of them work together in a prior organizations, and it can go to over 100, by the way. If you did, I did the analysis. I don't want to kind of give too much facts about Ninja. You can do it yourself and go online and search for it. But I went on, you can go to Rocket Reach or Lucia and just type Ninja, and it will tell you all the people and what's their relationships prior. Almost all of them work together at prior startups, almost 100 of them or 50 of them, especially the senior leadership. So talent acquisition is very important, but of course you can't do it from day zero. You have to scale. But before you onboard them, you need to know exactly what are the functions they will do within the system that you have, the blueprint, the system, the template that you have put together, whether it's rider management, whether it's inventory and stock management, whether it's customer management, whether it's technology management, whatever it is, and how they interact with each other. And most importantly, and that's the thing that I see most startups forget, especially if they don't have someone that comes from corporate or a previous scale up, is the fact of integrated into their operations plan feedback. Feedback is the thing that all mature and strong investors look for. Are you taking, do you have a systematized, do you have a structured way to take feedback from your own clients or not? If you don't, then probably you're not ready to scale. If we pump money into you, you will actually die. And that always happens. Sometimes if you feed something more than they can chew, if they bite more than they can chew, they choke. So they need to make sure that you have the capacity, and this is where very important, all of the operations plan, all of the strategies, all of the resources, all of that feeds into the confidence of the investor that you have the capacity to actually grow should they give you the money. Because remember, it's not about money. I always, just as a small tangent, I get in startups that come to me and tell me, oh, investors bargain to lower or higher or whatever their prices. I said, on the contrary, if you are someone who is able to make $1 today, $5 in 5 years, think with me for a second. You're now sitting with someone, and he comes to you and tells you, listen, I have this thing. If you put $1 in it, give me 5 years, I will give you $5 out. Will you give him 1,000, 2,000, 3,000? In my world, it depends obviously on the confidence, and the higher the confidence, the more I will give, because the less the discount will. Don't worry about the technicalities when it comes to finance, but if you're calculating your discounted cash flow, or you're calculating your financial model based on a certain methodology, then depending on your confidence, which can be literally calculated with numbers, the confidence will be established, and therefore they'll be willing to give you more money. It's as simple as that. As simple as that. If you're confident that your $1 will be $5, you will not give 1,000, you will give 10,000, 100,000 if you can. Because if you give 1,000, it'll be 5,000, right? But if you give 100,000, it'll be 500,000. That's exponentially higher. And you would want that. So the same thing applies with investors. You as a startup, your sole purpose on the face of the earth at this point in time is to build that confidence pragmatically, realistically, to make sure that when you go to an investor, you have a story, not just a story to tell, but a story to demonstrate, to show valid data that can make the investor confident that this $1 will turn $5 in 3 years. And that's exactly what they did with their operations plan, with their resource planning, which leads us to the legal element. Now, when it comes to legal element, obviously, they need to make sure that they are able to build everything from the ground up to be ready for IPO. And that's very clear from all of their communications. From the moment they started in 2022, they had their eye on an IPO in 2027. So what I mean by legal here is they know they will go into a different products. So compliance, regulation, licensing, and this is vertical. But horizontal it's also international expansion. So fast forward to the end of 2024, they expanded to Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Markets you don't hear about much, right? Especially we living in Dubai, we're living in our own bubble, that Dubai is the world. There's much more to Dubai as a launching pad, as a hub, than Dubai as a market itself. Dubai physically is a small market. But you can't from the beginning, from day one, start from Dubai and serve everywhere else. Usually that's a risky sign for investors. You can mitigate, but that's a risky sign. But if you start locally and then scale globally like they did, this is what happened to them. So they legalized their products, compliance, and everything that has to do with their structure, but also they expanded horizontally. And that's very important. So when they did that, they were able to demonstrate a very, very strong burn rate. Burn rate, for those who don't know, I'm sure all of you know, but just in case, burn rate is your expenses over time. Investors love to have a curve of some sort of an investment that starts slow, probably accelerates, but then slows down. And there's meaning to that. There's a test, and then you validated the test, you go all out, and then you stabilize. And then you test again, and then it's like the S curve. So your burn rate has to be in a way, and you should always talk to your financial advisor, but also you have to talk to your potential investors. What are the burn rate curves according to your own industry? Every industry has its own burn rate. For example, there's a capital heavy industry, Elon Musk and rocket ships, for example, or some sort of a deep tech. Usually there's a higher burn rate at the beginning, and there are specific investors that can tolerate that because they have their own mechanisms of validating and managing this risk. So know your investor, study them, study their portfolio, understand exactly what are the different elements that takes into creating the confidence for them specifically. So when you build your pitch deck, please, 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 take it from me. Do not build one pitch deck and send it to everyone. It doesn't work. And if it worked for you, you're just lucky. There has to be, even if you're sending to 100, 200 investors, it has to be one pitch deck customized to one investor, one to one. Every investor, there are investors that are concerned with sustainability. There are investors that are concerned with power, energy, education, finance, whatever it is that they're interested in or their focus area is. You need to make sure that you find that element, amplify it, understand what is it that they want, and adapt your strategies and adapt your pitch deck to them. Remember, they want you, it's just that they don't understand your language. You have to adapt to their language. Now, unless and until you have, for example, an investor who's purely crypto investor, end to end, and you're only a crypto startup, then fine, you speak the same language. Otherwise, you have to do your own research. And it's a volumes game. So when you prepare your burn rate, you make sure that you are able to understand what is the burn rate that that investor wants specifically and multiply it at a volume. So 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on and so forth. Lastly, once you have all of that done, the one thing that usually in startups don't think about from the beginning of their inception and their journey to go and acquire funding is what is the exit plan, not for them, for the investors who are going to be onboarded today. So think with me for a second. Ninja, in 2022, when they started, they were very clear that they wanted to have investors by 2023. And they worked everything to make sure that their unit economics are healthy enough to go and approach investors. But they went to them, they said, come with us at this valuation, and I will make sure that we are valued at 1.5 billion, I'm assuming, in 2025, and you will exit at this multiple. What's the multiple? 7.5x. 7.5x. They actually calculated, I think, my assumption, based on my readings and my analysis, they calculated their own multiples, their own investor exit plan from day one. Of course, assumptions, but based on theories. and obviously triangulated frameworks, when they build the model, I can assure you that they build it on a multimodal approach. So it's not just once or twice. It can be DCF, discounted cash flow. It can be other similar exits. It can be qualitative, so storytelling. It can be many others. So there are many models out there, and you choose your own model. I always tend to use at least 3 to 6 if you're early startup. If you're a very early startup, you need to have 3 to 6 to be able to calculate your exit. And usually your exit is between 2 to 4 years. Not your exit, your potential investor's exit. You have to say, Mr. Investor, give me, let's say $30 million at a valuation of $180 million. And in 3 years, I will be valued at $1.5 billion. So your investment is 7.5x. They must be able to do that and say that from day one. And you are able to do that as well. And by the way, if you're still sticking around until today, until now, in this webinar, I will give you a gift. I have developed an AI valuation tool which is obviously audited by CFOs and by VCs, friends of mine. It's still in beta, but it's extremely accurate. I've had it run on at least 6 or 7 startups and a few CFOs and few investors, and all of them had positive remarks on it. So by the end of this webinar, I will share that with you free of cost, no strings attached, only by virtue of you sticking around till the end. And we're almost there. So you calculate your exit plan from day one. And the exit plan is, this is how much potentially we will make, and this is how much you will exit, and this is our terminal value, which is the amount of free cash flow that we will be making at the exit point, which could be 3 years, 4 years, depending on your own VC. And every VC has their own timeline according to their fund, and you can check with your VC on that. But what you can do is build that number and then predict your multiples for the investor. Now, if you're working with VC, you might also want to calculate your carry, which is usually 25%. The carry is the amount that the VC himself will take, whether it's a general practitioner or otherwise. This is the amount that they will take. So if you dangle that carrot to them and tell them exactly how much money they will make when they also exit with their own LPs, with their own limited partners or high net worth individuals or whoever is investing in the fund that the VC owns, that will even dramatically increase the confidence. And that's what they did. By 2025, I can tell you, and I can predict what happened in the presentation room while they were presenting. They said, Mr. Riyadh Capital, we started in 2022. In 4 months, we had 1.5 million downloads. Our unit economics was over the roof, off the charts. We acquired this at this valuation. Today, by the way, when you're at that scale, you don't need to use DCF. You don't need to use acrobatic financial models to value yourself. Do you know how much revenue, of course with profit as well, but revenue they made by end of 2024 when they expanded to Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, and other parts of Saudi? $1 billion. Their annual revenue for 2024 was $1 billion. So if you come to think about it, their valuation was very low, 1.5x of their revenue, which is okay at this scale, of course. But this is what they achieved. And it was very easy for them to go to Riyadh Capital and other investors from the final round, from the recent round, to tell them, hey, this is our revenue, this is how much money we're making, and this is our aspiration. What's up? Of course it was a done deal, because investors like Riyadh Capital and others long for this type of unit economics and numbers and team that are able to execute and prove their worth from execution perspective. So of course they closed the round. Now here's the catch, and this is where it gets very important and interesting when it comes to exiting. 2 things happened on the exit. A, they showed the past, but B, they actually modeled the future. They know, and they were very clear that they have it's a pre-IPO round, meaning they have already a plan for an IPO in Tadawul in Saudi by 2027. And they hit two birds with one stone. A, they dangled the carrot of an IPO, which is the dream exit for any investor, obviously. But B, they used national patriotic language. We will only list in Saudi, in Tadawul, because we are Saudi born and made and grown, and we will always be Saudi. Not in London Stock Exchange, not in New York Stock Exchange, here. And they publicized it, and I can tell you now, they will keep on shouting this from rooftops, Vision 2030, IPO in Saudi and Tadawul, 5 billion. Very clear. So that was their exit plan. And from here onwards, the rest is history. The future is history. It's very clear. They will keep on executing, modeling their operations plan, their talent, and now they're much bigger than ever. And I can tell you that their valuation probably is higher now than 1.5 billion because of the buzz and because of the operations. And by the way, if you go to a simple unit economics, a very simple unit economics, trivial unit economics, if you go now to the App Store, especially the Google App Store, and look at the ratings, it's 4.7. And they have over 90,000 reviews. 4.7 stars from over 90,000 reviews. If that's not fitting the initial story of 2021 of convenience that can come into reliability and time, quickness, 25 minutes, I don't know what this. So at this point in time, if I'm an investor at this level, let's say sovereign wealth fund or mega investors or VCs, I will look at that and say, hey, you are a 5 billion today in the future. So the future is just history. You see how everything is connected together? You see how the start, the 2022 story, really beautifully links with the 2025 story and really links with the 2027 story, the IPO story that I can tell you it already happened, inshallah. In Saudi, in Tadawul, fulfilling the Vision 2027 for Saudi. I'm so stoked and pumped about this story because it's really a story that is worth studying, learning, and applying. So with that, let's look at the external influences. And I have my notes here just so I don't forget anything. When I talk about external influences, so this is just wrapping up the last bit of the story, putting it together. So A, market size and dynamics. So this is something that rarely you can replicate. So if today someone, and when I was marketing this webinar, and I got a lot of responses and a lot of registrations on it, many people sent me, oh, so can we actually now go into Q-commerce and do it again? I really don't know, but I don't think so. Because how often can you replicate COVID? 2022, where people still just getting used to QR codes and getting comfortable with it, people getting comfortable and sitting at home, everything coming to them far more at multiples than pre-COVID. It's timing. Second, competitive landscape. So what I mean by that is in Saudi Arabia and Gulf, generally speaking, it was very challenging, but the delivery players existed, but they were not as dominant in the market, and they were able to captivate the market because they are local. So there were Hunger Station, I think, there were Talabat, there were others. But in Saudi, it's too big and it's too vast, and it's required local knowledge and market knowledge. And this is key. That's why the founders are from Saudi, operating in Saudi with external knowledge, mind you, with international knowledge, but they still are local in the market. There's the economic conditions. Obviously, in Saudi, in 2022, Vision 2030 was hype, still hype, and it's still a reality. Saudi is progressing and growing at an exponential, mashallah, rate that we all feel proud, happy, and actually obliged to contribute to this growth of a country that is near and dear to all of our hearts. So this macroeconomic climate heavily influenced Ninja's fundraising at the first stage, but also today. So the first round of 30 million was based on that external influence. And the second round, obviously, is coming closer to the realization of 2030. And we know how things become at the last leg. So things speed up, things become even more hectic and more positive to achieve that ambitious goal. But also consumer trends. As I said, this is a cultural element of post-COVID-19 acceleration of online grocery. It was dramatic and normalized the idea of actually buying produce at home. Gone are the days where we go and check our tomatoes and our potatoes and our eggs in the store. Everything now is convenient. So it was easier at that time for Ninja to go into the market. Now, this is something that applies to everyone, which is the infrastructure and tech uptake and adoption in Saudi. It's crazy. It's obviously more than 100%. It's probably 110% because everyone has more than one phone and more than one device, and internet connectivity is almost 100%. And most of the population are young population. So this is all elements that are externally contributing to Ninja's success. So to sum up the external influences, you have the market size and dynamics, you have the competitive landscape, which was still coming up, so they were able to catch that. It was the economic conditions of Saudi Arabia's macroeconomic climate, which heavily influenced Saudi's fundraising initially. It was the capital scene, so the way in 2022 there was clear momentum and appetite for investors to invest in Saudi, and there's the consumer trends and cultural factors, obviously the use of Ninja, as we said, and also the culture of convenience post-COVID, and finally the tech infrastructure in Saudi and everything else. So in short, this extrinsic factors, the booming market demands, the friendly funding environment, the supportive government, the tech-savvy consumers really created tailwinds that Ninja masterfully rode, and this is the key. If you have tailwind, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will actually ride it. You have to be a master also in riding it. And that shifts to the intrinsic influences. So the first one of the intrinsic, the internal influences that allowed them to actually win is the founder's experience and credibility. Most of them had Q-commerce exits, Delivery Hero, etc., etc. So all of them had this knowledge in them. But also their team, their ability to attract their own team members, not just the founders, but also their own team. The network and ecosystem connections, so this is internal to them. They had their network, obviously, because they were exits and because they were unicorn exits, they just picked up the phone and talked to their other investors, the previous investors, and said, hey, do you want to be billionaires again? See easy. So it was easy for them to attract investors, but not just that. It was easy for them to attract CTOs, CPOs, and others, top talent, but also advisors. So the third element of their intrinsic influences is their ecosystem and support and mentorship. Their support and mentorship, especially after the first raise, is all people who are from ventures like Bunat Ventures and others, but also from the region, from Saudi, who believed in their cause and they were very important. So that's what I tell most of my startups. I tell them, make sure you have advisors that are active, that you see them, that you have communications with them. Don't just put your advisors on a website and expect investors to be fooled by, oh, you know this or you know that. Knowing someone is not important. Actively engaging with them. Mind you, once a quarter, you don't want to be also a hog. So once a quarter, make sure that you're able to have this communication recorded, because that should be in your data room and your communication. Cultural and execution mindset. Obviously, they started with 3 stores and then they went into many other stores and then they expanded. So there's a clear culture and mindset of execution carefully, but also go. Not just analysis paralysis, not just planning, but also planning, going, but most importantly, quietly. almost, we in Dubai, I talk about myself personally and my own network, most people in Dubai didn't hear about Ninja. Actually, when I was promoting for this webinar, I got many messages from people I don't know, but from Dubai numbers. They're saying, what is Ninja? They don't know what is Ninja. So that's crazy. They were hyper focused on their own market. Dubai is not their market. I don't care if people in Dubai don't know about us. So they were hyper stealth for almost initially, but when they boomed only in Saudi. So you know them only if you know Saudi. And then while they're hyper focused, they were able to achieve their unit economics. So their unit economics was not performative, it was meaningful. Because even though they were not shouting from rooftops, they were able to achieve the 1.5 million downloads in 4 months. Imagine that. Then obviously the local insight, the adaptation, the ability to understand it's Saudi-led. The Saudis, as a nation, is a nation of pride, and they want to see that they would support a Saudi venture. So the founders are Saudi, obviously, and they were able to make that connection, that likability connection. But also there's a very high supportive investment culture in Saudi, especially starting from 2023 onwards. And we can see that in multiple events, investment events, multiple communications, multiple webinars in Saudi, that the growth rate is exponential. So to summarize the intrinsic influences that enabled Ninja to actually go beyond any measurable KPI is that they had a stellar team with experience, they had a strong connection and network, they had deep local knowledge, and they had a disciplined culture when it comes to execution. Those are the decisive factors, in my opinion, that are convincing and project confidence to investors. So, last thing is the action plan. What do we need to do now as investors? As investors who have funds, who has portfolio companies, or as startups themselves. First thing is make sure that you assemble a rock star team early on. I have a couple of clients, couple of startups who I'm working with. They actually fired most of their top founding team members early on. To me, that's a red flag. If I see on when I do my due diligence as an investigator, and I see that the members went in and out in the first few months, if in the first few years, that's a red flag. That means you were not able to assemble a rock star early on. Do not start if you don't have the A team early on. Second, focus on unit economics. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Search what is your specific unit economics. Put KPIs, measures of how to reach those KPIs, and work towards them. Even if you fail, that's good. Now you know, put a new unit economics and move on. But from day one, that will guarantee sustainable growth, but also managed burn rate. So in case you're a B2B, that's your CAC and LTV. In case you're B2C, that's your DAO, MAU, and WOW, and everything in between. Of course, there's always a hybrid, but you have to have your own unit economics initially. Then leverage market tailwinds and align with national agendas, especially in our region, in the UAE, in Saudi, in Qatar, in Jordan, in Egypt, this block of land. Governments are the bigger influences to economic trends. So make sure that you align to them, whether it's your go-to-market, your messaging, your branding, or your product itself and product market fit. So that's very important to understand that you align. For example, Ninja smartly aligned with Saudi's Vision 2030 everywhere, which is the diversification and tech innovation. Execute in stealth. This is very important. Most startups I see, they make videos and they go viral too early, that they overhype and they either scare investors or can get some investors, but then they cannot move forward because they have a track record of failed executions or pivots. So pivoting by its own right is not bad. It's just that if it's based on a hype, then this is where it gets scary for us investors. And that's very, very clear. For example, Ninja, they were able to get an eye-popping number like 1.5 million downloads in 4 months, or 1 billion in revenue in 2 years in stealth mode. So execute in stealth. Make sure that you're substantive, you're meaningful, you're able to attack the market exactly as it is, not by shouting and cheating the metrics. You have to have strategic fundraising plan. So for example, Ninja did start with external fundraising from Europe and the States, and then they came internally. So know exactly what is it that you want to do and how you want to do it from the first. If you want investors, don't go to investors prematurely. I have to make sure that you are able to understand this very clearly. Do not reach investors if you are not ready. You're wasting your time, but most importantly, their time. It will take you at least, and this is my own experience, and I'm sure that many will agree with me, it will take you at least 3 months to prepare to meet investors, minimum. Some people take them 6 months, if not a year, not less than that. I always have this analogy. If I want to go to the Olympics, I cannot fool myself and say, you know what, I'll work 10 hours every day for 6 months, and then in 6 months I'll go to the Olympics. It doesn't work that way. I have to work diligently at least 5 to 6 hours every day for 5 years to be able to even remotely. I'm not talking about winning the Olympics, just qualifying to be able to be fit for the Olympics. 5 years. So what makes you think that you can be ready for the investors just because you sat with your friends or with your angel investor and tell them, hey, and convince them with stories? If you want to go en masse, please do not give founders and startups bad name. Study, educate yourself, prepare, and then go to market. Go to market to investors. And this is exactly what Ninja did. Make sure that you have multi-vertical expansion to boost your lifetime value. What I mean by that is, for Ninja, what they did is they increased their customer lifetime value by expanding their product offering. For example, they started with groceries, they attracted some clients. Then they went into pharmaceuticals, and then they went into food. So they kind of kept the first customer on and increased their wallet share and LTV, the lifetime value, by creating an economies of scope, which is creating other elements that the same customer might be interested in. So make sure that this is also part of your plan. If you're not doing it now, clearly show your investors that you're able to do it in your plan, and you will use their fund to do that. Localize your operations and customer experience. This is very important in Ninja's case, but also it's very important. This is mostly a B2C thing, but also a B2B. You need to understand that if a country, let's say in Europe, it takes 1 month for a B2B contract to close, here it takes 3 months. So make sure that your pipeline and your operations is localized according to a local operations fundamentals. There's no universal applicable strategy for adoption. It doesn't work. Every country has its own, and don't think that you can read a website or ask ChatGPT to know how you can approach a market. Use local knowledge. This is very important. It's non-replicable. Your success in the UAE, in Saudi, in Germany, in Beirut, in Egypt, in Cairo, in Jordan, does not necessarily guarantee your success anywhere else. So make sure that you have clear localization of operations and customer experience in your plans. Then, founders' prior track record. So there's very, very important to make sure that your founder, you don't have to be a second-time founder. But if you come from that industry, if you were someone who is in ships, who is in food and beverage, and you started this is very important. And make sure that if you don't have it, you have someone in your team who has it. If both of you don't have it, you have a close advisor who has it. But that knowledge has to be from within, from day zero, from day one. Make sure that your timing and market window is very clear. If you missed it, this is the biggest indicator of pivot. So when you start, make sure that you run the market based on your testing and hypothesis and theory. But if you know now for sure that you have missed the market, missed the window, pivot. And this is, how do you know that? A, by your unit economics, but also B, by your customers' feedback. That's very, very, very important to make sure that you integrate that into your plans to capture customer feedback and record it. And there's a system for that. The market conditions, for example, in Ninja's case, Saudi market conditions of Vision 2030 and capital flood into Saudi was very clear between 2021 until today. So they captured that. So make sure that your market conditions, you're aware of your own market conditions, and you're able to capitalize on that. Make sure that you are able to create an early traction. Otherwise, stay lean, stay low. Do not approach the market unless you have again, I'm talking about if you're preparing to go to market for investors. If you have an investor who believes in you, by all means. If you have an angel, if you have the 3 Fs, family, friends, and fools, by all means. But if you're going to market to investors as cold introductions, make sure that you have clear early tractions. In this case, 1.5 million downloads in 4 months in Ninja's case. So make sure you have your own unit economics clearly proven, not predicted, proven, done. If you are able to go into the first movers advantage, that's great. In Ninja's case, they were one of the very few first movers advantage at scale locally. And again, if someone from abroad came and had that in market entry, but they're not from the region, to you, that's music to your ears, because you can capitalize on national likelihood, on patriotic language, because you are locally homegrown. So if you have, for example, if they have Deliveroo, which is a UK-based company, you can start and eat their market so easily because you can use a language that, by the way, is unique to you. So that's very important. And lastly, make sure that you have government relations that is very clean and clear because of all of the policies, regulations, and everything that has to do with the government needs. My screen is giving me a message. Give me a second. And we're done. So in conclusion, what I want to say is prepare, prepare, prepare. A is team, team, team. B is your understanding of your local market. But C, your understanding of your own investor dynamics. These are the things that you, if there's the key takeaways, is the unit economics initially, your exit plan, and your proven track record of implementation. It can be 2 months, it can be 3 months, it doesn't matter.